Get out of the way. Who do you think you are trying to board this plane? The angry shout of the white officer Jake Turner echoed through the crowded terminal at Roosevelt Gateway International Airport. Everyone froze, witnessing a black woman being pulled out of the boarding line, simply because a biased police officer thought she wasn't worthy. I have a ticket. I've passed the security check. You have no right to treat me this way. The woman protested, her eyes firm though her voice remained calm. But that only made Jake angrier. He growled, I don't need a reason. I know you're kind. Always hiding something. Without another word, he shoved her shoulder, causing her to stumble. Outrage rippled through the crowd, but no one dared to intervene. A slap landed hard across her face, leaving everyone in stunned silence. The air was thick with shock and anger. The woman raised her hand to her burning cheek, but her eyes didn't flinch. You've just made the biggest mistake of your career, officer. Jake sneered. Are you threatening me? Who do you think you are? A no-name black woman thinking she can challenge the law. She pulled a wallet from her bag, opened it, and presented a card. Tessa Moore, CEO of Skyway Connect. The very airline you're trying to keep me from boarding. Jake's face turned pale. The crowd gasped. Airport staff rushed over, and a flight attendant exclaimed, Oh my God, that's the CEO of our airline. Tessa stepped forward, her voice sharp. You didn't just assault an innocent passenger. You slapped the face of the entire aviation industry. And trust me, I won't let this go. Jake stood frozen, stammering, unable to speak. Airport security immediately escorted him out of the area, while Tessa was escorted to business class with the utmost respect. A slap can be a wake-up call. But this slap was a lesson for the entire system, a lesson about arrogance, prejudice, and the price of judging others based on skin color. And that's what happened to Officer Jake Turner, a man who thought he had the right to judge others, only to be defeated by his own arrogance. Now, take a seat, because I'm going to tell you everything from the very first moment to the final second when justice spoke loud and clear. Before we continue, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. That means a lot to us. Thank you so much. Now imagine you're rushing through the busy halls of Roosevelt Gateway International Airport, heart pounding, desperately trying not to miss your flight. You see chaos near the gate, a stern-faced officer is blocking a black woman from boarding, rejecting her ticket and yelling loud enough to stop everyone in their tracks. Before you can even grasp what's going on, the woman stands her ground, calm but resolute. Few knew, least of all that rude officer, that behind that modest appearance was a powerful secret. She was the CEO of the very airline he was trying to deny. Get ready to witness a shocking truth. Roosevelt Gateway International Airport buzzed with its usual morning rush. Tires screeched at the curbside as drivers unloaded luggage in haste. Sleepy passengers shuffled toward check-in counters, and announcements echoed from overhead speakers. The chatter of conversations blended with the occasional roar of planes taking off in the distance. As the first rays of sunlight poured through the vast glass windows, the airport came alive with energy. Everyone carried their own hopes and worries for the journey ahead. At the center of that bustling scene stood Officer Jake Turner, a man who took great pride in maintaining order. Standing 6 feet 2 inches tall, with a muscular build, a crisply pressed uniform, and sharp eyes, Jake was the image of a vigilant airport officer. He had worked in this position for over a decade, guiding countless passengers, catching pickpockets, and breaking up minor scuffles. And while his efficiency was undeniable, there was always an unspoken truth about his behavior, except to those who had experienced his unfair treatment firsthand. He often judged people based on their race, attire, or accent. Too often, Jake's way of keeping order crossed the line into bias and racial remarks. That morning, Officer Jake Turner was on high alert after receiving a vague tip about potential smuggling activity. He patrolled the terminal, checking tickets, scrutinizing passengers, but unfortunately, his suspicions were often influenced by prejudice, especially toward people of color. At Terminal B, among the line of passengers waiting at the security checkpoint, was a black woman around 40 years old named Tessa Moore. Dressed simply and composed, no one recognized that she was actually the CEO of Skyway Connect, a major airline working with many national carriers. She was conducting an undercover inspection to evaluate service quality after several customer complaints. Tessa used a different name, dressed plainly, and behaved like a regular passenger. When she helped an elderly man untie his shoes in line, that small act caught Jake's attention. With his prejudiced mindset, he immediately suspected she was hiding something. Feeling that his professional instinct had kicked in, Jake started keeping an eye on Tessa, unaware that this action would soon lead to a confrontation that would shock the entire terminal. Meanwhile, Tessa calmly walked toward gate B23, where Skyway Connect Flight 3045 was about to depart. She reminded herself that today she was just another passenger here to see if recent complaints were true. The boarding area was crowded with passengers preparing to board. Tessa chose a seat by the window, quietly watching the planes outside, feeling a sense of pride seeing the flight number she once helped plan. That was why she was here, to observe the real customer experience. Suddenly, the boarding announcement for Skyway Connect 3045 echoed through the speakers. The gate agent, Zoe Blake, looked tired but remained professional as she guided passengers. Tessa took mental notes, evaluating the agent's tone, demeanor, and problem-solving skills. Right after, she noticed a small incident. An elderly couple had incorrect priority boarding status. Zoe Blake apologized and quickly fixed their tickets. Tessa quietly took note. Clearly, the upgrade system had a glitch that needed attention. As she reflected, Officer Jake entered the area, his eyes scanning the crowd before locking onto Tessa. Her calmness unsettled him. With his inherent bias, he convinced himself she was hiding something. Jake approached Zoe Blake and quietly pointed toward Tessa. "That black woman over there, is she traveling alone? You should double-check her ticket. Something might be off." Zoe Blake hesitated but agreed to scan the ticket again. All of Tessa's information was correct. Still, Jake wouldn't back off, believing his gut feeling was enough, even without any evidence. Tessa remained calm, unaware that this minor moment was becoming a larger confrontation. As she moved closer to the gate podium, Zoe Blake noticed Jake from the corner of her eye and gave a slight nod. "May I see your boarding pass and ID again?" Zoe Blake asked politely. Tessa looked slightly puzzled. She had already scanned her ticket earlier but smiled and handed over her driver's license and boarding pass. "Of course," she said. "Is there a problem?" "Just a routine recheck," Zoe Blake replied, trying to stay professional. She scanned the pass again. The system accepted it immediately without any issue. She handed it back. "You're all set, Ms. Moore." Then she looked at Jake, as if to say everything was clear. However, Jake remained motionless. He wanted more. He cleared his throat. "Actually, Mom," he said, addressing Tessa directly, "I need to speak with you privately. Please step aside." Tessa raised an eyebrow slightly but stayed composed. "Of course," she replied. She stepped out of the line with her small carry-on bag. The eyes of other passengers began to turn toward them, some curious, some concerned. A silence often preceding the confrontation seemed to hang in the air. Zoe Blake stood behind the podium, unsure whether to intervene or just continue the boarding process. Meanwhile, Jake led Tessa to a corner near the gate window, away from the crowd's earshot. Tessa looked him straight in the eye. "How can I help you, officer?" The question lingered between them. Jake's jaw tightened. He still couldn't articulate a specific reason beyond a vague sense of suspicion. He resorted to his usual line. "I just want to make sure everything's in order. You came through security alone, correct?" "Yes, that's right," she replied calmly. "Just like thousands of other passengers every day." Her calm demeanor irritated Jake even more. "Is that your only luggage?" "Yes, officer," Tessa repeated, her voice respectful but firm. "It's a short trip, so I'm traveling light." Their conversation was outwardly polite, but the tension was clear. Tessa recognized what Jake was doing, but she needed to stay undercover and avoid drawing attention. The last thing she wanted was a scene before boarding the flight she had come to inspect. Still, the obvious injustice was hard to ignore, especially for a woman who believed in creating a friendly and fair travel experience for all passengers. Jake gestured as if he wanted to inspect her bag. Tessa opened it without objection. Inside were neatly folded clothes, a tablet, a small toiletry bag, and some business documents with no company logo. Jake flipped through the items, disappointed not to find anything suspicious. When he came across the documents, flight schedules, operational data for Skyway Connect, he paused. "These documents look official," he said. Tessa nodded, tension showing on her face for the first time. "I work in the airline industry," was all she said. She wasn't ready to reveal her identity, not yet. Jake stared at her for a few seconds. The only conclusion he could draw was that she was a lower-level airline employee, maybe a gate agent or a flight attendant, which only deepened his suspicion. Why would a gate agent or flight attendant be flying under another airline's ticket? It was a puzzle, and in Jake's mind, puzzling pieces like that only confirmed his preconceived narrative. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "All right," he said. "But I'll be watching you." Tessa nodded and gathered her belongings. "Thank you, officer," she said, keeping her tone courteous. Then she returned to the boarding line, ignoring the curious stares from other passengers. As she scanned her pass at the podium, Zoe Blake avoided her gaze, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She gestured for Tessa to proceed into the jet bridge. The tension lingered in the air, even after Tessa disappeared from sight. Jake remained near the gate, arms crossed, determined to keep watching. He had no real reason to escalate things, not yet, but he had a feeling. He always trusted those feelings. The morning had begun with tension, and it was far from over. Tessa found her seat in business class 3A by the window overlooking the wide tarmac. She settled in, placing her carry-on in the overhead compartment. The seat was comfortable, with plenty of legroom and soft upholstery. A flight attendant, Jenny Caldwell, approached to welcome her. "Good morning, Mom. May I offer you a pre-flight beverage? We have orange juice or water." Tessa looked around. A few other business class passengers were already sipping drinks. Normally she might have declined, but part of her mission was to assess whether the airline's service and courtesy were consistent. "Yes, I'll have a glass of water," she replied with a thankful smile. Jenny nodded and returned with a small plastic cup of water, placing it on Tessa's tray table and handing her a menu for in-flight meals. "Our flight time today is just over 2 hours," Jenny said. "We'll be serving breakfast shortly after takeoff." Tessa thanked her. From the corner of her eye, she noticed some commotion at the aircraft door. Officer Jake Turner was standing at the entrance of the passenger cabin, seemingly having a tense discussion with a crew member. One of the flight attendants frowned, clearly confused about what was going on. Eventually, Jake appeared dissatisfied but left. This was highly unusual. Police officers rarely stood at boarding gates for long unless there was a specific issue. Tessa tried to refocus on the reason she was there. She flipped through the in-flight magazine, occasionally glancing at her phone to check emails, even though she hadn't connected to the airport's Wi-Fi. Although she hadn't logged into the airport Wi-Fi under her real identity, she had a checklist in her mind: evaluate cabin cleanliness, staff courtesy, meal quality, and overall efficiency. She also wanted to talk to other passengers if possible, to assess their experience. But her thoughts kept drifting back to Officer Turner. His behavior was deeply concerning. She knew what discrimination felt like. This wasn't the first time she experienced it, and it wouldn't be the last. But its blatant nature, in front of so many people, made her feel uneasy. Within minutes, the plane was fully boarded and the door sealed. The engines hummed softly in anticipation. A flight attendant began the standard safety demonstration, walking the aisle to ensure seatbelts were fastened and tray tables stowed. Tessa exhaled, letting a sense of calm wash over her. Once airborne, she hoped to review her notes and strategize how to address any service shortcomings upon returning to corporate. For now, she just wanted to relax, or at least try. The plane pushed back from the gate, taxied onto the runway, and quickly took off. The increasing altitude pressed Tessa into her seat. She looked out the window, watching the ground shrink below and the city stretch out like a miniature map. The feeling of soaring into the sky never ceased to amaze her. It was one of the reasons she had devoted her life to aviation: the wonder, the freedom, and the belief that anything was possible if you just take flight. About 20 minutes into the flight, the captain announced they had reached cruising altitude. The flight attendants began breakfast service. Jenny came by with a tray, offering a choice between an omelet and French toast. Tessa chose the omelet. She was about to open her tray table when her phone vibrated lightly in her pocket. Surprised, she realized she had forgotten to switch it to airplane mode. Reflexively, she pulled it out to turn it off. Glancing at the screen, she saw a message from a colleague, someone who knew about her undercover mission, saying, "Heard a rumor a security officer gave you trouble. Let me know if you're okay." Tessa quickly replied that she was fine and would follow up after landing. She turned off her phone completely, letting the momentary anxiety pass. Then she returned her focus to the in-flight experience. She unwrapped her utensils and tasted the omelet, slightly overcooked, and made a mental note. The coffee, however, was strong, which was a plus in her assessment. Across the aisle, a couple was chatting about their connecting flight. "I just hope we don't miss our next flight," the woman said worriedly. Tessa leaned over politely and asked if they'd been informed of any delays. They shook their heads, so she offered to check with the flight attendants another chance to observe how the crew handled passenger concerns. After Tessa finished breakfast, Jenny returned. "Is everything all right?" she asked, directing the question to Tessa and the couple across the aisle. "Everything's fine," Tessa said, carefully choosing her words. The omelet was a bit dry, but overall good. "The couple across the aisle is concerned about their connection. Any updates on arrival time?" Jenny nodded sympathetically. We expect to land on time, maybe even a few minutes early. I'll double check with the cockpit and get you a more precise update. Would that help?" The couple smiled in relief. Tessa nodded. So far, Jenny was doing well in terms of courtesy, attentiveness, and helpfulness, another positive mark on Tessa's mental checklist. Then a flicker of memory crossed Tessa's mind. Jake's suspicious gaze, that lingering sense of being targeted. She brushed it aside. She was now thousands of feet above ground, hopefully out of reach of any more trouble from that officer. The flight continued smoothly, with only minor turbulence causing the seatbelt sign to blink a few times. Otherwise, it was a routine journey. Unbeknownst to Tessa, trouble was already brewing on the ground. Jake had spoken to the gate staff after the plane took off, fishing for more information about the mysterious passenger. When he learned she worked in the airline industry, his suspicion grew. "She's not wearing a uniform," Jake insisted. "Doesn't that seem odd to you?" Caught off guard, the gate staff politely explained that corporate employees often travel for business out of uniform, especially if they were managers or higher. But Jake wasn't satisfied. He left the terminal with a clenched jaw and a determination to pursue the matter with the airline's administration. He was convinced that if he dug deep enough, he would uncover something shady. Meanwhile, in the sky, Tessa remained unaware that Jake was still investigating behind the scenes. She ended her flight by chatting with a few other passengers, noting their experiences. Through this story, we understand that no one deserves to be looked down upon just because of their skin color or appearance. A person cannot be judged merely through the lens of prejudice, because behind an ordinary appearance may lie great intelligence, a strong heart, or even a position no one would expect. Racial discrimination and abuse of power not only harm individuals but also distort society and make it unjust. This story is also a powerful reminder that respect is not a privilege reserved only for those in high positions. It is something every person deserves, no matter who they are. Those who live by arrogance and prejudice will eventually receive a costly lesson in return. In 2025, what we can do is start with ourselves, respect differences, speak up when we witness injustice, and teach our children to be empathetic and love people regardless of skin color. Small actions today can create a wave of meaningful change. And by 2030, will racism still exist? Perhaps it will still be present somewhere, but personally, I believe that if we continue to nurture kindness, spread awareness, and educate the younger generation about justice and human rights, then at the very least, this world will be much better than it is now. Because real change does not come from one great person, but from ordinary people walking together toward the light. Note: this story is entirely fictional, created for the purpose of raising awareness about important social issues. We aim to highlight the importance of personal and collective responsibility, justice, and the need to treat all people with dignity and respect regardless of their skin color, social status, or life circumstances. We firmly oppose all forms of violence, discrimination, prejudice, and injustice in society. The events in this story may be emotionally intense and are intended to be educational, encouraging viewers to reflect on moral values, fairness, and compassion. Viewer discretion is advised. If you feel that the content may affect you emotionally, please consider this before continuing. We hope this story contributes to positive conversations and helps inspire a more just and humane society.